Thank you for joining me for another episode of Taste of Magic. This episode, we're going to be looking at even more Return to Ravnica spoilers. Now, there is a lot of spoiler cards to look at this week, so much so that I think I'm going to split it up into two episodes. The first episode, I am going to show just guild related cards. The second episode, I am going to show all the other cards. So, very first I want to show is some Izzet cards. The first one is Counterflux. This is the fifth card in the cycle we were talking about last week with the spells that can't be countered. It counters target spell you don't control. Also, it has Overload, and it can counter every spell you don't control. Now, granted, these are only spells that are on the stack, don't get too excited, but this is an awesome way to combat a Storm deck. Before, Storm decks really you could not fight with counter spells because you could only counter one copy. I mean, granted, you could if you had a bunch of counter spells, you could counter them, but this card reminds me a lot of Double Negative, which could counter up to two spells. But the problem with Double Negative is if you need to counter two spells at once, odds are you need to counter more than one spell. So this could also be used against Cascade. If you counter the Cascade spell, the Cascade effect still goes off, so you would still need to counter another spell. This you can just wait till everything resolves. Well, not resolves, but the Cascade effect resolves and the new spell goes on the stack, counter both of them. Or you can counter Storm cards, you can counter Replicate cards, anything where there's a bunch of spells going off at the same time. Also, if you just want to be crazy in multiplayer, a bunch of people get into a counter war, you can just go, no, everything goes away. So, it's pretty cool. Alright, another Izzet spell is Epic Experiment. Epic Experiment is basically Genesis Wave, but with sorceries and instants, and it is awesome. It is X and one blue and one red, and you exile the top X cards in your library, and each one that has a converted mana cost of X or less you get to cast. And that is awesome. I want to build a deck around this card right now. I don't know what I would put into it, but it seems awesome. I've made many Genesis Wave decks. I've made Eldrazi Genesis Wave decks, Planeswalker Genesis Wave decks. I just want to make an Epic Experiment deck. It seems awesome. The name is cool. I like it a lot. So I'm a fan. It's even a mythic rare, and it seems mythic. Like Genesis Wave seems like it should have been mythic. So, another Izzet card. We have the Mercurial Chemister. He costs 5 mana, and he's only a 2/3, so he's a little expensive. But you can pay 1 blue and tap him to draw 2 cards. So that's value right there. The next turn you can get 2 cards. Also, you can pay 1 red and discard a card, and he'll do damage to target creature equal to the discarded card's converted mana cost. Also fun. It would be awesome if he did it to players too, but doing it just to creatures is also useful. This is a good way for Izzet to deal with other creatures. Izzet doesn't really have a lot of creature control. Well, I guess they do have some damage, but it's a good card. Another crazy card that the Izzet has is the Niv Magnus Elemental. He is just 1 hybrid mana, and he's 1/2, so he's a Sanctuary Cat, basically. But he has the ability that you can exile an instant or sorcery spell you control and put 2 +1/+1 counters on the Niv Magnus Elemental. This could be useful with Epic Experiment, I guess, if you have some extra spells that you don't need. Or, also another thing that this would work with is Storm. You can exile a couple copies of your Storm card that you don't need, or you can do it with Replicate. I mentioned those because it would be better to exile copies of a spell so that the actual spell goes into your graveyard and you could potentially get it back. So that seems like a better idea. And one more Overload card that is just absurdly ridiculous is the Cyclonic Rift. This card is insane. So, 1 colorless and 1 blue, return target non-land permanent you don't control to its owner hand. Or you can overload it, return every non-land permanent you don't control to its owner's hand. That's just crazy. I mean, granted, it's 7 mana, but it's crazy. Like that's just absurd. Uh, look at Devastation Tide, and granted it has a miracle cost, but Devastation Tide costs 5 mana, and that returns all non-land permanents you control. You're paying just 2 more mana, and you only target your opponents. That's just crazy. And also, it gives you the added usability of you can use it early in the game just to get rid of one thing. Um, this card is crazy. Cyclonic Rift is just crazy. So that is it. Next, we have some Selesnyan cards. Selesnya, we have the Centaur Healer. This is just a 3/3 for 3, and when it enters the battlefield, you get 3 life. Copacetic, I like it. Yeah, it's good. Not super amazing, but it's a 3/3 Centaur, and it's fun. We have Trostani, Selesnya's voice. So here is our guild leader for Selesnya. It's 2 green and 2 white. I think all of the guild leaders have 2 of each color in their casting cost, which is good. I think that's a good balance. Like three of each color seems like way too much, but 2 of each color, just enough that you need to stay in those colors. You can gain life whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, equal to the toughness, and you can populate by tapping her and paying some mana. So very useful. You want this in your Selesnya deck, definitely. So I like it. Speaking of populate, we have growing ranks. How about just getting a free populate each of your turns? That's awesome. So just populate at the beginning of your upkeep. That's pretty awesome. So what do you want to populate? Well, there is a green card called Slime Molding, and it's X and a green, and you can get an XX ooze creature, and so then you can populate it. So that's one of our first token cards that we've seen. Alright, so that's Selesnya, and we have Azorius. First Azorius card is very similar to Growing Ranks. It is Martial Law. At the beginning of your upkeep, you detain target creature and opponent controls. This is cool. Great flavor, great picture. The effect, it makes sense. Like, this is just a great card. It's awesome. You can just keep detaining a creature every turn. It's awesome. I was kind of iffy on Detain before, but I like this card. Another card. This is kind of the opposite of Rakdos' Return. It is Sphinx's Revelation. It's X and a white and 2 blue. You gain X life and you draw X cards. Useful, not very mana efficient. For 6 mana, you're drawing 3 cards and gaining 3 life. For 7 mana, you're drawing 4 cards and gaining 4 life. But later in the game, it's definitely useful. It gives you a couple extra life to hold on. This is definitely a late game card you want to hold on to. Next, we have Detention Sphere. This is a cool card. This is like Oblivion Ring, plus Maelstrom Pulse, and it's really cool. So you exile target non-land permanent, and then each other non-land permanent that shares its name. So that's kind of why it's like Maelstrom Pulse. But yeah, it's really neat. And it's like Oblivion Ring. It's the enchantment that you exile it, and when they get rid of the enchantment, then it comes back. So, pretty cool. Alright, and lastly we have Golgari. It was kind of a light week for them. We got the Deadbridge Goliath, which we've already seen. He's a 5/5 for 4 mana, which is pretty neat. Very, very good value. And you can scavenge to put 5+1/+1 counters on target creature you control. So, that's awesome. And then we have Gerard's Orders. This card is really neat. really interesting. It does what you want to do if you're playing Golgari. You search for your library for 2 creatures, you put one in your hand, you put the other one in your graveyard, and then you shuffle your library. And this is definitely what you want to be doing as Golgari. It seems a little expensive to me. Like, it seems like they could have made it for 3, but it's definitely a good card. It definitely seems like a good card. You get 1 creature for your hand and 1 for your graveyard, which you're playing Golgari. You're already 1 creatures in your graveyard, so it's a double benefit there. You know, if you're just playing it to search for a creature, it's not very good. But since you're playing Golgari, it definitely makes sense. And so it's a good card. Um, with Dredge, it would not be as good because Dredge, it's very easy to get cards into your graveyard. But this time around, it's much harder to get cards into your graveyard. So it feels better in this block than the original Ravnica block. Finally, we have Rakdos. There's 4 new Rakdos cards. The first one is the Rakdos Charm. You can exile cards from a player's graveyard, destroy an artifact, or each creature does damage to its controller. The last one seems like a very anti-Selesnya effect, but of course it's also very anti-white, because white is the color that gets the most creatures, green is the color that gets the biggest creatures, so it's black and red, so it's anti-white. Makes sense. Kind of neat. Not my favorite charm so far, but next is the Rix Mahdi Guild Mage. This is the new Rakdos Guild Mage. Like this one a lot. Very offensive. You can activate it to give target blocking creature -1/-1, which will be really nice since you're going to be attacking a lot with your unleashed creatures. And you also can have target player lose 1 life if they've already lost life this turn. So that's interesting if you happen to have extra mana at the end of the turn. Next one is Chaos Imps. This is another unleashed creature, and it's really big for an imp. It's a 6/5, so it'll be a 7/6 if you unleash it, and it gets trample as long as it has a +1/+1 counter on it. And this is just for 6 mana, so 7/6 trampoline flying creature in red for 6 mana is pretty impressive. It feels weird that it's imps. Like, it feels like a dragon. I don't know, but imps are cool. I like imps. So, and finally, the last one we have is Cryptborn Horror. This guy has trample, but he's a 0/0. He comes into play with X +1/+1 counters, where X is the total number of life lost by your opponents this turn. It's opponents, so it's cool in multiplayer. If you do something that does damage to all your opponents, and it's kind of similar to, there was a guy who had Bloodthirst X. It's kind of like Bloodthirst, but Bloodthirst X. So he's cool. You probably don't want to run too many of them in a deck, because if you get stuck holding 2 or more of them in your hand and you don't have a way to do damage, then you're going to be in bad shape. But he does have trample, so if you manage to get one on the field that's fairly large, then you can do damage and make another one. So those are all the guild cards that I'm going to talk about. The next episode, I'm going to talk about the single colored cards and the artifacts, and I will see you next episode.